Ava Renshaw had never been the kind of woman who expected her marriage to unravel in spectacular fashion. Yet she had always sensed a thin layer of tension beneath the surface of her life with her husband. Marcus, she often brushed it aside, telling herself every long-term relationship bruised a little around the edges, especially after 10 years of shared routines and quiet compromises. They lived in Asheville in a house they'd saved for, a place with wide windows and creaking floors that Marcus claimed gave the space character. Ava worked from home as an administrative coordinator for an outdoor gear company, while Marcus ran a small landscaping business that kept him out late during the warmer seasons. She used to love watching him come home covered in sawdust and sunlight, proud of the life they had managed to build out of patience rather than luck. But lately he had grown unpredictable. Restless, disappearing for hours with vague explanations, and returning with a smile to force to be real. Ava told herself it was stress, exhaustion, the endless pressure of keeping a small business alive. Yet a quiet instinct inside her whispered something much colder. She ignored it until the day everything shifted. It began innocently, with a call Marcus claimed was from a supplier. He stepped outside to take it, something he'd never done before, and Ava watched his silhouette pacing along the driveway, shoulders tense, voice low. When he returned, he fumbled his phone into his pocket too quickly, as if hiding it. For days afterward he acted jittery around her, offering unnecessary reassurances about his schedule, his errands, his clients. After 10 years of marriage, she knew the rhythms of his honesty. And this wasn't it. The turning point arrived a week later when Ava received a message request from an unknown woman named Tessa. The name meant nothing to her at first, but the profile picture caught her attention. A woman in her mid-30s, sharp features, striking eyes, wearing a necklace identical to one Ava had seen once in the back of Marcus's truck. She dismissed it as coincidence until a second message appeared, longer, more urgent, telling Ava that it was important and that she needed to hear something about Marcus. Ava deleted it, refusing to be pulled into a stranger's drama, but her mind simmered with unease. 2 days later, on a quiet morning that smelled of rain, a new message arrived, this time not text, but a voice note. Ava stared at it for a long time before tapping play. Hearing a woman's breath waver on the other side, the voice was steady, but wounded, murmuring that she was done covering for Marcus, done being the secret he used and discarded whenever it suited him. She said she didn't want to hurt Ava, but she couldn't watch him carry out the plan he'd built without Ava knowing. She said she had overheard something she was never meant to hear, something that would affect Ava's future in a way she didn't deserve. The recording ended abruptly, leaving Ava suspended between disbelief and dread. She played it again and again, hands trembling, her stomach twisting tighter with each repetition. Betrayal was a word she'd never associated with Marcus. It felt too cruel, too far into their life together. But the recording carried a truth that sounded too raw to fake. She didn't confront Marcus immediately. Instead, she spent the evening watching him from across the living room as he scrolled through his phone, smiling at something she couldn't see. Every gesture looked different now, every familiar habit suddenly suspicious. That night, after he fell asleep, Ava lay awake listening to the steady rise and fall of his breathing while replaying the recording. In her mind, dissecting every syllable like a map leading to a buried truth. The next morning she acted normal, making coffee, asking about his schedule, pretending not to notice the faint smell of a woman's perfume on his jacket. She needed information before she made a move. She needed to understand what plan the mistress had been talking about. She needed to understand how deeply she had been lied to. Over the next few days she carefully observed Marcus, noticing details she once ignored, the sudden locking of his phone, the tense way he silenced certain calls, the overly detailed explanations for simple errands. He was unraveling, and he didn't even see it. And then, on an otherwise ordinary afternoon, fate delivered Ava the next piece of the truth. A text appeared from the same unknown number, this time not a warning, but an apology. Tessa wrote that she had made a terrible mistake and that she needed to speak to Ava in person because the situation was far worse than Ava realized. Ava stared at the message for a long time before typing a single word back. When Ava agreed to meet Tessa the following afternoon. Though her mind wavered between fear and icy determination as the hours crawled by, she had spent the morning pacing the house, unable to focus on work, unable to quiet the gnawing anxiety inside her chest. She kept imagining worst-case scenarios, each darker than the last, each more plausible than she wished to admit. When she finally left the house, she felt almost weightless, as if her body had finally surrendered to the heaviness she'd carried for weeks. They met at a small public garden on the edge of town, the kind of place where people rarely lingered long enough to overhear anything. Tessa was already there. Leaning nervously against a wooden railing overlooking the koi pond, she looked more fragile in person than her photos had suggested, her features strained, her posture tense, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. The moment she saw Ava, a strange mixture of guilt and relief washed over her face. Ava braced herself and approached, steady on the outside but trembling within. Tessa didn't waste time on small talk or feigned politeness. She began speaking, with a desperate urgency, unraveling a story that twisted Ava's stomach into knots. She explained that she had been seeing Marcus for over a year, believing him when he claimed his marriage was all but over, believing he was staying with Ava only until he could secure the finances to separate smoothly. But recently, she had learned that Marcus had no intention of leaving Ava. Instead, he had been using Tessa to help him gather information he could manipulate details about Ava's work, her accounts, her routines, things that seemed harmless on their own until pieced together into something sharper. According to Tessa, Marcus had been planning to push Ava out of their shared life entirely, and not through divorce. He wanted to maneuver her into a position where she would be financially ruined and forced to move out of the home she had helped pay for. Ava had always known the house deed held both of their names, but Tessa revealed Marcus had been working with someone to alter future documents in a way that would strip Ava of her legal footing. Ava's heart pounded as she listened, struggling to absorb the full weight of the betrayal. The details were twisted and meticulous. He had been setting up a fake business expense under Ava's identity, funneling debt in her name, orchestrating the illusion that she had mismanaged funds at work, even planting the suggestion of misconduct that could one day be used as leverage. For months he had been subtly sabotaging her professional record by forwarding flag emails to himself and deleting them from her notifications, positioning her as careless and irresponsible. If this continued, she could lose her job entirely, and with it the health insurance and financial stability she relied on. Ava's skin went cold. She had noticed small inconsistencies before: the odd emails she didn't remember sending, the missing documents, the complaints from a supervisor that never felt deserved, but she had chalked them up to stress. Hearing the truth now felt like drowning in ice water. Tessa admitted she hadn't realized the full scope of his plan until recently, when she overheard a phone call Marcus had taken after she thought he'd left her apartment. He had talked about timelines and finalizing the transition, and removing Ava from the equation in a way that didn't sound metaphorical. That was when fear had replaced infatuation. She didn't want to be an accessory in dismantling someone else's life. She told Ava she was no saint and didn't expect forgiveness. But she couldn't keep silent anymore. For the first time, Ava saw not a rival, but a frightened woman caught in the same trap, albeit from a different angle. Ava listened, feeling her heart break and harden at the same time, when Tessa mentioned that Marcus had been meeting with a man known for handling shady consulting work. Something darker settled in Ava's gut. She began connecting pieces. Marcus had never meant her to see the missing financial statements, the sudden pressure for her to sign paperwork she hadn't fully read, the way he had encouraged her to reduce hours at work under the guise of relaxing more. She realized he had been isolating her slowly, methodically, making sure that once the ground gave out beneath her feet, she would have no one to turn to. Tessa handed Ava an envelope before leaving, telling her it contained copies of messages, bank records, and screenshots, proof of everything. As Ava held the envelope, she felt something shift inside her, not fear, not shock, but a quiet ignition of resolve. She drove home with a mind alight with strategy rather than panic. She didn't open the envelope right away. Instead, she hid it in the back of her office closet, behind old tax papers and forgotten sweaters. a temporary vault until she could go through it methodically. That night, she observed Marcus with a new lens, watching the way he carelessly hummed while making dinner, how he asked about her day with the same fake warmth he always used when lying, how he seemed entirely unaware that the ground had begun shifting beneath him. She answered him calmly, each word measured, each expression neutral, while beneath her stillness a storm of quiet calculation formed. She went to bed early and pretended to be asleep when he climbed in next to her, but this time, instead of lying awake in fear, she lay awake in strategy, planning each step she would take to protect herself. She didn't know yet how deeply Marcus was willing to go, but she knew she had to act before he made his next move. The truth was now out in the open, and Ava understood that the real danger was just beginning. The next morning, Ava approached her day with a deliberate calm that fooled even herself at first. She went to work, carried herself with the same quiet efficiency as always, but her mind was a spinning web of careful calculations. She knew that Marcus was clever, manipulative, and had spent months preparing to outmaneuver her, but she now had Tessa's evidence, and with it, the power to think 3 steps ahead. At lunch, she retreated to her car and opened the envelope carefully, spreading its contents across the passenger seat. Screenshots of messages between Marcus and Tessa, bank statements showing money funneled in her name without consent, emails he had deleted, but Tessa had salvaged every piece of proof, painted a picture of a man who had not only betrayed her emotionally, but had orchestrated a meticulous plan to dismantle her life entirely. Her stomach churned, but her hands were steady. She copied everything onto an encrypted flash drive, took photos with her phone, and carefully resealed the envelope. She realized that the first step wasn't confrontation, it was protection. If Marcus noticed even a hint of suspicion, he might accelerate his plan, and Ava couldn't afford that. Over the next week, she built a hidden digital archive, a secure line of evidence that could not be erased. She created backups in multiple cloud accounts under anonymous emails, downloaded Tessa's screenshots, cross-referenced them with her own records, and slowly started piecing together a timeline of Marcus's manipulations. Every incident she had dismissed as trivial now fell into place like puzzle pieces. The forged bills, the unreported contracts, the subtle nudges to shift her savings accounts into joint funds he controlled. Each move was part of a larger blueprint for her downfall. Ava also quietly reached out to a trusted lawyer using an alias, presenting enough information to get preliminary advice without revealing her full identity. The lawyer confirmed her fears. Marcus's plan, if left unchecked, could leave her with nothing, but she now had leverage. Meanwhile, she began observing Marcus more closely, noting his habits, routines, even the tone of his voice when he believed no one was listening. He still moved through the house with casual arrogance, unaware that every slip, every hurried glance at his phone was being catalogued. One night, as Marcus stepped into the garage ostensibly to check on his tools, Ava followed at a distance and watched him open a hidden drawer in his workbench. Inside were more records and signed documents, and a small binder labeled with her initials. Her life, meticulously chronicled and manipulated without her knowledge. She backed away quietly, heart hammering, but with a sense of grim satisfaction. She knew she now had what she needed, not just to protect herself, but to confront him in a way that would leave no room for denials. Days passed, and Ava's plan began to take shape. She began placing small, calculated triggers, asking seemingly casual questions about finances, observing his reactions, planting subtle tests to see how far Marcus had gone. Each answer, each twitch of discomfort, confirmed Tessa's warnings. He was completely invested in his scheme, yet oblivious to the fact that she was now equally invested in protecting herself. Then, one evening, Ava received a message from Tessa that made her blood run cold. Tessa warned that Marcus had begun accelerating his plan, possibly moving funds and making legal moves behind Ava's back that could take effect in less than a week. Time was suddenly compressed. Every day was now a race, every decision critical. Ava returned home that night with renewed focus. She prepared herself as if entering a battlefield, strategizing her every interaction, even the casual greetings she would exchange with Marcus. She noticed a shift in him, subtle, almost imperceptible. Perhaps he was growing impatient. Or perhaps some instinct told him that Ava was no longer the passive partner he had once controlled so easily. But he was still careful, still hiding behind rehearsed gestures and empty reassurances. That night, Ava lay awake longer than usual, replaying every conversation, every suspicious action over the past months. She realized the complexity of Marcus's manipulation had been his greatest weapon. And now her understanding of it would become hers. She began drafting a timeline of events, a catalog of his lies, deceit, and the methods he had used to isolate and control her, and then cross-referencing it with Tessa's records. By dawn, she had created a full dossier that could not only protect her legally but could expose Marcus fully if necessary. The following morning, Ava enacted a subtle psychological maneuver. She dropped hints that she knew more than she actually did, mentioning trivial details that were only in Tessa's records. Watching Marcus squirm without appearing accusatory, his face betrayed micro-expressions of unease, tiny cracks in his facade that revealed he was starting to sense the walls closing in. Ava kept her voice calm, her expression neutral. But inside she was a coiled wire of intent. Over the next few days, she continued to push gently, observing every reaction, documenting every movement. Her meticulous approach revealed a new vulnerability in Marcus: overconfidence. He had assumed Ava would never discover the depth of his plan, that she would remain oblivious, passive, trusting. That arrogance was now his undoing. Then, in a twist Ava had not anticipated, Marcus made a mistake. He left his phone unattended for just long enough for Ava to access it without him noticing. And there, she found an encrypted message to an unknown recipient, detailing the final phase of his scheme: timing, funds, legal documents, and contingency plans in case Ava discovered anything prematurely. She copied everything immediately, heart racing, realizing that the final confrontation was imminent. Ava now had all the pieces, all the evidence, and the upper hand. She just needed the right moment to strike, to bring everything into the light, and to do so in a way that would leave Marcus no room to maneuver. The storm that had been building quietly for months was now poised to break. And Ava was no longer the passive observer of her own life, she was the architect of the reckoning that Marcus had never seen coming. Ava spent the next morning in careful preparation, treating the day as if it were a chessboard and every action a calculated move. She had mapped Marcus's routines down to the minute: when he checked his emails, when he took calls in the garage, when he went for his morning coffee. She made small, deliberate adjustments to her own schedule to ensure she was never caught off guard, never giving him the slightest hint that she knew more than she let on. Her days blurred into a strange, tense rhythm of observation, documentation, and meticulous planning. Each night she returned home exhausted, yet her mind refused to rest. She reviewed Tessa's records once again, cross-referencing them with the evidence she had gathered from Marcus's phone and documents, identifying patterns she had previously missed. The scale of his deception was staggering. He had created fake invoices, fabricated complaints against Ava at her workplace, and even manipulated joint accounts to siphon money while making it appear as though she had mismanaged funds. Ava realized that any confrontation needed to be decisive, executed with precision, leaving him no room for denial. That afternoon, she began setting subtle psychological traps. She asked seemingly innocent questions about joint finances, watching for micro-expressions, subtle hesitations, a flicker of guilt. Marcus's reactions were increasingly strained. He laughed a little too loud at jokes she didn't make. He fumbled through explanations that sounded rehearsed, and his eyes flickered toward his phone with a reflex of anxiety. Ava recognized the pattern. He was beginning to sense that the walls were closing in. That evening, she received a cryptic message from Tessa: "Be careful. He knows something. Don't let him see you panic. Tomorrow could change everything." Ava understood that Marcus's final moves might be imminent, and she needed to act before he executed the culmination of his plan. She spent hours that night organizing her evidence into 3 separate packages: one for law enforcement, one for her lawyer, and one for herself, a complete record of every manipulation, every lie, every financial and emotional violation. The depth of his betrayal became almost physical, a pressure in her chest that made her palms sweat as she stacked the files. The next day, Marcus's behavior shifted noticeably. He was sharper, more controlled, but the tension in his movements betrayed him. He asked unnecessary questions about documents he had no reason to question, lingered suspiciously around areas of the house where Ava had stored the evidence, and became overly meticulous about locking his phone. Ava recognized this as desperation. He believed he still had the upper hand, but she had already anticipated his maneuvers. She began planting subtle cues, documents left partially open, notes in places he would notice, hints dropped about her own observations, forcing him to reveal his plans in small, incriminating ways. And then, a breakthrough occurred. Marcus had been careless in one crucial moment, forgetting to clear an email draft detailing an alternate plan to shift assets entirely into his control. Ava discovered it while pretending to be preoccupied in the kitchen. The draft laid bare the extent of his plotting, specifying dates, amounts, and contingency measures, leaving no room for his usual denials. That evening, she confronted him indirectly, speaking calmly about things she had noticed without specifying what. Marcus froze momentarily, the first real crack in his facade. His eyes darted to her with a mixture of panic and disbelief, though his words remained carefully neutral. Ava could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly as he reached for a drink he didn't finish. She had him exactly where she wanted him, unsettled, uncertain, and unknowingly confessing through his own defensive maneuvers. That night, she sat in the office reviewing every piece of evidence one final time, ensuring she had no gaps, no loose ends. Every email, every transaction, every message from Tessa was accounted for. She realized that while Marcus had built a labyrinth of deceit, Ava now held the master key. She felt a mixture of exhaustion, exhilaration, and grim satisfaction. The plan had shifted from survival to retribution, but she understood that it needed to be precise. One wrong move could let him escape, and Ava was no longer willing to risk that. Over the next 2 days, she executed small, strategic maneuvers to consolidate her advantage. She contacted her lawyer under her real name this time, providing the complete dossier, and prepared to file reports with law enforcement. Simultaneously, she kept Marcus on edge, hinting at discoveries and knowledge he did not suspect she fully possessed. He became increasingly erratic, a barely contained storm behind a mask of composure. And then, the tipping point arrived. Marcus decided to accelerate his timeline, believing he could finish his scheme before Ava acted. He arranged a meeting with the consultant he had been using to manipulate documents and finances, planning to finalize the last steps. Ava, anticipating this, discreetly followed him, keeping a safe distance, watching the exchange from a parked car. She observed Marcus signing documents, exchanging envelopes, and speaking in hushed tones about the final phase of their operation. Her hands tightened around her phone as she took photographs, recorded video, and documented every detail, knowing that this evidence would ensure he could never claim ignorance. That night, Ava returned home, her mind alive with strategy, realizing the final confrontation was near. Marcus would have to be removed from control entirely, held accountable, and confronted with undeniable proof. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like the arena in which the ultimate reckoning would take place. She had all the tools, all the leverage, and for the first time in months, she felt a quiet, resolute sense of power. The storm she had feared was now in her hands, and the reckoning she had been preparing for would finally arrive. The day of reckoning arrived with a sense of tense inevitability. Ava woke before sunrise, her mind sharp, every detail of her plan rehearsed repeatedly in the quiet of the house. She didn't feel fear anymore, only a fierce, methodical clarity. Marcus had become reckless, convinced he could complete the final phase of his plan before she could act, unaware that she had already anticipated his every step. Ava had already secured all the evidence, duplicated it, and hidden it in places Marcus could never find. She had her lawyer on standby, Tessa ready to testify, and law enforcement briefed with carefully documented proof. She moved through the house as if nothing had changed, making breakfast, straightening the living room, and smiling faintly when Marcus emerged from the bedroom with that practiced ease he believed impenetrable. Marcus tried his usual small talk, but there was a subtle edge to his questions, a slight tremor in his voice that betrayed the anxiety he refused to acknowledge. Ava answered calmly, measuring each word, watching for micro-expressions. He asked about papers he had hidden in the garage, about emails she hadn't read, about Tessa, casually testing her composure. Each question was a trap, each slip a confirmation that her preparations had been effective. She let him talk, keeping her tone neutral, letting his overconfidence do the work she couldn't risk doing overtly. Later that afternoon, Ava executed the final phase of her plan. She requested Marcus join her in the office under the pretense of reviewing finances. As he sat, she placed the flash drive containing the full record of his deception in front of him, along with printed documents, screenshots, and copies of all the emails and communications. Marcus's face shifted from calm to disbelief in seconds, then to fury, then to panic, but Ava remained composed, unflinching. She began speaking, recounting events in a measured voice, explaining that she knew everything: the falsified invoices, the redirected funds, the manipulations, the threats, the intent to destroy her professionally and financially. Marcus sputtered, trying to deny, trying to twist the narrative, but Ava countered each assertion with evidence, letting the weight of proof speak louder than any words. When he realized there was no escape, that every lie had been anticipated, every move documented, his demeanor crumbled entirely. Ava's phone rang quietly on the desk. It was her lawyer confirming that law enforcement was ready to intervene, that the documentation she had prepared was sufficient to secure immediate action. Marcus tried to reach for the flash drive, but Ava had anticipated the gesture, holding it firmly just out of reach. She explained that everything was being sent to authorities and that his actions could no longer remain secret. He realized fully, for the first time, that the game was over. His years of deceit, manipulation, and control had been rendered powerless by her meticulous preparation, by the calm, strategic mind that had replaced the trusting spouse he had once believed blind to his schemes. In the following hours, law enforcement arrived, Tessa gave her testimony, and Marcus was confronted with undeniable evidence of his actions. The weight of his plan, once carefully hidden and methodically executed, collapsed entirely. Ava remained composed throughout, documenting each step, ensuring that nothing would be missed, that the record would protect her fully and leave Marcus accountable for every element of his betrayal. By evening, Marcus had been removed from the home, and legal measures secured Ava's finances and property. The house, once a place of subtle tension and unseen threats, now felt secure, her sanctuary reclaimed. Ava walked through the rooms, observing details she had previously ignored: sunlight on the floors, the quiet hum of a safe environment, the absence of fear that had plagued her nights. She had survived the manipulation, the betrayal, the near destruction of her life, not by luck but by vigilance, strategy, and courage. In the days that followed, she slowly restored the routines and spaces that Marcus had sought to corrupt, reinforcing boundaries, reinforcing her own sense of power and control. She maintained communication with Tessa cautiously, recognizing her role in exposing the truth but ensuring that trust was rebuilt carefully. Ava's experience became a crucible of personal transformation, from unsuspecting spouse to vigilant strategist, from fearful participant to architect of her own protection and justice. She knew that while scars of betrayal would remain, they were outweighed by the lessons learned and the reclamation of autonomy she had fought for. The ordeal had been harrowing, yet it underscored a critical truth: that deception, no matter how carefully constructed, could be dismantled by clarity, preparation, and unwavering resolve. Ava, sitting in her home one evening with the sunset casting golden light across the walls, reflected quietly on the journey. She had emerged from the shadow of betrayal not only intact, but empowered, ready to live fully in the life that Marcus had tried to dismantle. Her heart, once heavy with suspicion and fear, now carried the steady beat of control, knowledge, and certainty. She had seen the plan, survived it, and outmaneuvered it, proving to herself that even the most insidious deception could not defeat a mind sharpened by vigilance and courage. Ava knew the future held new challenges, but for the first time in months, she felt an unshakable confidence that no one could manipulate her again.